Welcome to Santa Barbara Talks with Josh Molina. Today is going to be a very special episode. I am here with Greg Rech, a member of the Architectural Foundation, a well-known architect in town, and Betsy J. Green, an author of many fantastic books, as well as a member of the Architectural Foundation. And we're going to talk about the 1925 earthquake that hit Santa Barbara. We're going to be celebrating, commemorating the anniversary and all the ways that this earthquake affected, impacted, and changed Santa Barbara. And there's an incredible month-long series of events and lectures and walking tours where anybody can become an expert on what happened and what it meant because there's going to be so much information out there. So what a conversation this is going to be. Greg and Betsy, welcome to the show.
Thank you,
Great to
Josh.
be
Thanks
here.
for having us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I grew up in Santa Barbara, Goleta. I'm a California guy, so I'm used to earthquakes. I've felt a few over the years. Obviously, 1925 was an earthquake of a different proportion, and it really, I guess, from the research, sort of set Santa Barbara into a new architecture trajectory. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about that. I want to get to all the events that are going on. We'll get to that a little bit later, but let me just start off right away. And maybe I'll start off with you, Betsy, because you are an expert on this. You have a book. How did the earthquake affect Santa Barbara? Obviously, it was a big one, but why is this earthquake so significant?
Well, it gave us a chance for basically an architectural do-over. It happened in a way at a good time. It was the Roaring '20s. There was a lot of building going on in Santa Barbara, a lot of contractors, carpenters, workers here. We had already been thinking about having a consistent architectural style that respects our Santa Barbara Spanish heritage. And some of the buildings had been built in that style already before the earthquake. We had the Libero Theater, the City Hall, the newspaper building, the Granada building, El Paseo. And so in a way, we were ready. And the earthquake also happened at a good time of year. It was summer. It was not a winter during the rainy season, so people were able to camp outside afterwards. It also happened 6:45 in the morning, 6:42, not too early. So people were home, kids were home, people were not out on the streets where the debris was falling. And so in a way, it happened at a good time. People cleaned up right away and earlier, just a couple hours after the earthquake, there were organizations in De La Guerra Plaza serving hot coffee and sandwiches.
Yeah, so the earthquake was June 29th,
Mhm.
1925, and this was it was a big deal. It was a big earthquake, and this is coming after the San Francisco one. So a lot was learned locally from San Francisco in terms of how to respond to this earthquake. 11 people died in this earthquake, but it could have been much worse, right? It could have been
Mhm.
much more catastrophic. You talk about the timing of when it happened. Greg, when you think about the earthquake and what's going to be happening in June to commemorate it, what's on your mind when you think about this event?
Well, it's really a chance for people to, not only re-educate themselves about earthquake safety, but also to sort of re-explore the downtown area of Santa Barbara. Most of the damage occurred along State Street due to the building types and building sizes that existed there. And so we're providing in the month of June, we're providing a series of lectures. It's going to be every Thursday night at the Architectural Foundation building. And then we're also going to be doing walking tours, so a chance for people to actually get out in the downtown area and see a lot of buildings that were constructed in the Spanish colonial revival style following the earthquake. It really was a transformational period. And as Betsy noted, there were people in the city that were interested in creating this, the streets of Spain and really bringing this style, to make Santa Barbara a unique place. And so the earthquake really was, transformational in that sense because so much needed to be rebuilt following the earthquake.
Right. And Betsy, you had mentioned that some of the buildings survived. Some of the buildings, the newspaper building, the Granada City Hall, they had already been, I guess, were recently rebuilt. And so, can you talk about what was damaged, what was destroyed, what was lost in that earthquake that we would be familiar with today?
Right. Well, most of the photos are of the worst hit buildings, which is happens back then and happens today as well. It was basically along State Street was the worst damage. In general, when people move to a new location, they bring their ideas of architecture with them. So the buildings along State Street, built, say, in the late 1800s, were built by people from back east and building the same way that they would have in, the Midwest or back east and not really thinking about earthquakes. In fact, historian Neil Graffey has famously said State Street looked more like Toledo, Ohio than Toledo, Spain. A number of earth buildings did survive, and one of the big ones was what is now the Museum of Art on State and Anapamu. That was the post office at the time, but that was built by the federal government, had a steel frame, and it did just fine. So a number of buildings were okay. The worst damage was along State Street. Now we think that the epicenter was out in the channel somewhere. And in fact, a couple of people talked about being out on State Street and watching the buildings fall down almost in a wave, one by one. So State Street was the worst hit. The buildings were older. And apparently the soil under the ground under State Street is alluvial. It's basically rocks that have been washed down over the years. And so not as stable as something that's more solid. So State Street was basically the worst damage. That's where we had our big buildings, and that's where the worst damage was.
Yeah, it was, I guess, in the research that I did and some of the documents that you had sent me beforehand, there was talk about sort of reinventing Santa Barbara and making it that Spanish colonial style. Obviously, even back then, as it is today, it's everything's slow when it comes to changing architectural styles. It takes a while.
Mhm.
There's so much public interest and review, but this event kind of allowed for a sort of a quickening of that process, right? Because now everyone's rebuilding, and so a lot of what we see in Santa Barbara is made happen because we were able to start fresh, so to speak, with some of these buildings in the downtown area. Now, I know my friend Sherry Ray has talked about what Pearl Chase had done and Bernard Hoffman after
Mhm.
the earthquake. Can you talk a little bit about, not to steal too much of her thunder when she gives her talk, but can you talk a little bit about Pearl Chase's role in the rebuilding of Santa Barbara and Bernard Hoffman with the earthquake?
Well, the two of them and on that committee, the Plants and Planting Commission, had been advocating for a Spanish colonial revival style here. Obviously, in Santa Barbara, tourism is important now as then. We don't have industry, we don't have a lot of agriculture. We're really dependent on visitors, and keeping a consistent Santa Barbara Spanish colonial revival style is very important to the city. And after the earthquake, it began little by little to be legislated. And now there's something called Pueblo Viejo, meaning old city. And if you're in a certain area of downtown Santa Barbara, there are only certain styles that you can build, and even to the fact of certain colors. People walking around Santa Barbara today may notice that a lot of the windows and door frames are kind of a muted blue-green color. That's one of the approved colors here in Santa Barbara area. In fact, it's nicknamed Pearl Chase Blue because the story is that Pearl Chase went around to some painting consultants and said, okay, we have white stucco walls, red tile roofs. What's a nice complementary color? And they mixed up some colors for her, and we came up with this muted blue-green color. That's one of the approved colors for window frames in Santa Barbara. You're not going to find purple and pink window frames downtown anywhere.
Mhm. So it allowed for the creation of the El Pueblo Viejo district and
Hmm.
these standards that we have for development downtown. That's amazing. So, Greg, can you talk a little bit? We'll just interject real quickly. Sherry's giving a talk. What are some of the talks that you think are going to be most appealing to people who want to learn more about the history of the quake?
Sure. Yeah. Well, the Sherry's actually going to be doing two talks,
Mm.
and the way that we've broken it down is that Sherry's going to be talking about Pearl Chase because she actually was going to University of California at Berkeley during the time of the San Francisco earthquake, and so she was involved with some of the post-earthquake, uh, I guess you would say, comfort providing comfort to victims of the quake, people that had actually crossed the bay after the earthquake, and probably relief is a better word. And came to the Berkeley area with relief efforts, and Pearl Chase volunteered with that. And so, really, very interesting life. And then, sort of her work with, beautifying Santa Barbara in general and her work with Bernard Hoffman, the creation of El Paseo as an example of Spanish colonial revival style. And so the first lecture is going to be Pearl Chase's life up to the day of the earthquake. And so cover all of her prehistory, her experiences with earthquakes, her knowing, Julia Morgan and other architects. And then the second lecture is going to be then Pearl Chase's work relating to Plans and Planting Commission following the earthquake and all of the activities that she and others were involved in, helping out Santa Barbara and being a part of this transformation. So it's really kind of nice. And I've really Sherry's got a book out now called String of Pearls. And being an architect, I certainly knew about Pearl Chase, but I really only knew about the part of Pearl Chase and sort of her relationship to architecture and buildings in Santa Barbara and beautification. But she was involved in all sorts of things. I mean, what a fascinating person. I can imagine. I've heard stories, that she was always going here and there and never sat down. And I can imagine she was involved with Native American Indian affairs and state parks and our national parks. It just, I mean, an incredible woman. And so to be able to hear her story through, Sherry's eyes and yeah, so we're breaking it down into two parts. The first part prior to the earthquake, and then the second part following the earthquake. So both of them should be really very good. We're looking forward to hearing from her.
Yeah, what is it? If we didn't have Pearl Chase, we'd have condo towers at Alice Keck Park Memorial Gardens.
Right, right. One
So,
of her last preservation efforts, right? Yes. Yeah.
so the earthquake happened June 29th, 1925, and I guess the strongest shock was about 6:42 a.m. And I want to read something from the Santa Barbara Morning Press that was written about the way people felt before the earthquake. I guess, maybe part myth, maybe part true. Animals can feel earthquakes coming along. Of course, our technology now gives us, I guess, a few seconds sometimes to know there's an earthquake. But I want to read partly because, I'm a journalist, so I love the writing here. It's just so intriguing. But there were mild shocks around 3 a.m. So leading up to the big quake, which I guess registered 6.3 on the Richter scale, about 6:42. This is from the Santa Barbara Morning Press, July 1st, 1925. For several minutes before the earth shock wrecked the city, residents in all parts of town reported queer performances of barnyard flocks, dogs, cats, horses, and cows, and even birds. Dogs ran helter-skelter with a bewildered look, some howling mournfully. Chickens began a barnyard chorus in all parts of town and flocked together in corners of pens. Cows and horses snorted and pranced, while cats crouched in, seeming fear from an unknown danger that confronted them. Birds flocked together on wires and chirped continuously for several minutes before the first shock was felt. And I just love that writing because it's obviously dated, but it's
Good
so
description, though,
and it
right?
works. 100 years later,
Yeah.
wow, that's
Hmm.
amazing. It works. Also tells a little bit about Santa Barbara at that time. I mean, we got chickens and cows and it's like all this, farm animals. It's such a different period. And I guess, State Street was most hit because this is where we have the most buildings. And we're still at a time where we have basically just, one story, residences. So it's just fascinating to go through all that history. Betsy, in your book, you spoke to survivors at some point of the 1925 quake. Can you talk a little bit about what they shared, what it was like for them at that time?
Sure. I didn't talk to any actual survivors. I talked to some descendants, and there were a lot of stories in the local newspapers. People talked about waking up and running down the stairs, and the house shaking. A lot of people's chimneys fell down. Now, frame houses flexed, but the chimneys did not, and the chimneys fell down. And then things inside the houses. They said everybody seemed to hear a rumbling coming or a thunder sort of sound coming from under the earth, in addition to the earthquake. And then people also talked about, I could hear the books falling off the bookcases, and I ran downstairs and there were jars of jelly that had fallen all over the floor. And one lady said the contents of her refrigerator looked like a salad. So people sort of basically ran out of their houses, and not too many people got hurt. And then some people gathered bricks from the chimneys and started making barbecues because chimneys had fallen down, so it was not safe to use your stove. And so they started making barbecues, or they had barbecues. And people did a lot of sharing with neighbors, with other people that they knew. I was really impressed I basically said the buildings fell apart and the people came together. So.
And is that true? Oftentimes we'll glamorize historical facts, right? Because we're so far
Mhm.
removed from it. Did this quake really rally the community together and make everybody sort of on the page? Obviously, when we experience shared trauma, all of us at the same time, it allows us to heal from that. But were there architectural fights? Were there people who were saying, "Let's don't do this" or "Let's build it the way it was"? What was it like at that time, I guess, from a political perspective, or were we all on the same page?
Well, one of the things that was stressed was that the big problems in Santa Barbara had not been the earthquake, it had been poor construction. Now, I think this was in part thinking about future tourism here in Santa Barbara, then as now, and saying that no, Santa Barbara isn't a dangerous place for earthquakes. If we build properly, we won't have the problem. And they're right in many ways, pointing to the buildings that survived. Not everything on State Street fell down. A number of buildings lost their facades, which in a way meant all you had to do was put up a facade in the Spanish colonial revival style to remake the building.
Yeah, so it's just so interesting that something like this would happen. And when you think about today, we're trying to think about State Street, right? We're trying to figure out what State Street's going to look like in the future. And in many ways, COVID was not an earthquake, but it sort of hit like a quake in terms of overnight things changed, and they haven't been the same. And I guess we're in that process of rebuilding now. How long did it take, after 1925 for these new buildings to go up? Was it a decade long thing? Was it quick? What was that process
Well,
like?
yeah, I wouldn't say that it was decade long. It was a couple of years. First of all, they had to clean up the debris,
Mm,
and that took a while. In fact, we actually even had prisoners cleaning up debris. When
wow.
the earthquake hit, the jail here, which was built of brick, it's not around anymore, crumbled. And so the dangerous prisoners were transferred to a jail in Ventura. The ones that were, I guess, misdemeanor guys were allowed to go home here, but they had to come back every day and clean up the debris. We had college students cleaning up debris. We had Boy Scouts also. So just, clearing the roads, clearing the debris, and then taking down the buildings that were, severely damaged and needed to come down before they could be rebuilt. So that took a while. I'm working now on 1926, and there's still like one of the buildings that was hardest hit was the Arlington Hotel. Part of it collapsed and some people died. So in 1926, the ruins were apparently still there. And about the only report of looting that I've seen was in 1926, a guy was arrested for stealing bathtubs from the ruins of the Arlington Hotel.
Mhm.
But other than that, I didn't see any reports of looting or people running around stealing things or acting crazy. Most reports talked about maybe there were some screams at first, but then people were just kind of quiet.
Yeah.
And uh, community groups started doing things in De La Guerra Plaza and Alameda Park and Veracruz Park over on the east side. The community, as a lot of people were cleaning up the debris, and that took a while, the community uh, put together some recreational activities for the people. They opened and set up an open air theater downtown so that people could come at night. And I guess there was a screen outside and a
Mm.
stage for vaudeville performers. So people could come at the end of the day and relax and watch a movie. And one of the movies was actually a aerial view of the city after the quake. As you can imagine, there were airplanes around in 1925, and you can go on YouTube now and see some aerial views of Santa Barbara after the earthquake. And that's one of the things, the movies that they showed to people. In addition, they had in Alameda Park and Veracruz Park, they had bands come and play music, play some old familiar folk songs that everybody knew. People could play around and sing along with them. They also had playground hours at some of the parks where they had supervisors come in the afternoon so people could bring their kids there because there was no school, drop off the kids, and then go back and help with the cleanup of the debris. But in 1926, they were still cleaning up debris. In fact, on Lower State Street, sort of around the train station, there was a theater called the Potter Theater, a
Mm.
brick theater, fell down. And in 1926, the ruins were still there. They hadn't figured out what to do with it. And so it did take a while for them to clean up the debris. There were some things that were rebuilt pretty quickly in 1925. As I mentioned, it was actually a good time. It was the Roaring Twenties. There were a lot of contractors here, builders. So people just sort of switched from building to rebuilding or reconstructing.
Yeah. What was the industry in 1925? What were the jobs? What were people primarily doing?
I would say the tourism industry, the uh, the movie theater business, the Flying A film studio was gone, but there were still a lot of hotels and motels here. And in the 1920s, a lot of people had cars, so they were starting to camp out in their cars. So Santa Barbara was kind of a tourist place, as it is now.
Yeah. Greg, can you talk a little bit about the walking tours and what people are going to be able to experience and see and how those are going to work?
Sure, yeah. I mean, we have two tours. We have a tour that happens on Saturdays and a tour that occurs on Sundays. And the Sunday tour, even though it was established back in 2000, was just kind of a natural fit for a commemoration of the 1925 earthquake because it begins at the public library, which was badly damaged but survived the earthquake. A lot of the facades of the library fell off. And then we walk through a La Arcata court, so heading down towards Figueroa. And that site was actually where Our Lady of Sorrows existed prior to moving to its current location. So there was a church there. It was an adobe church that had a brick veneer on it. and that church was heavily damaged and was actually taken down. And then La Arcata was built in its place just shortly after that. And there's a number of new buildings. New, I say, is built in between 1925 and 1927 on Figueroa Avenue. And then we head out towards State Street and walk up, and we see the what's now the Museum of Art, which was the post office, and we go into the courtyard of the San Marcos building, which was heavily damaged in the earthquake. And there it was. Sort of, a lot of the facades that fell off in along State Street were because they were the facades were built out of unreinforced masonry, and so there was really nothing to hold the facade of the building, and so it shook loose very easily. San Marcos building was an interesting example because it was an L-shaped building, and so you had the building along Anna Pamu Street and the length of the building along State Street, and they were both sort of opposing each other, and they kind of bang together at the corner. And there's pictures, and we'll have in another lecture that we're going to be providing. We'll be showing pictures of damage of the earthquake, and so this was the two wings of the building were banging together, and the I would say probably 50, 75 feet from the corner of State and Anapamu, the building basically was demolished or demolished itself down to the ground. And the other remaining portions of the wings were still standing. And so it's sort of an example of, we've got building types can be good or not good in earthquakes, and also building shapes. And so that was a building that was, fairly new, but it was because of the shape of the earthquake that building suffered damage. And then the tour continues up State Street, and we talk about the Granada Theater, which was built before the earthquake, just right before the earthquake, 1924. But that theater has actually had, seismic work done. I think it was 2005 to 2010 when they redid the Granada Theater, and then they, as part of that process, there was some seismic upgrading that needed to be done to the tower itself, and so that became part of the project of the Granada Theater. And then we continue further up State Street to the Arlington Theater, which is Betsy mentioned earlier, used to be the Arlington Hotel. There was the Arlington Hotel that fell down in the earthquake was the second hotel to occupy that block. The first one was called the Arlington Hotel, and it burned down and then was rebuilt. And you think, I mean, it was a massive hotel. It took up most of the entire city block. And so after that fell, then the Arlington Theater was built, and then the other businesses and buildings that you see along State Street on either side of the front entrance to the Arlington were built after that.
Yeah. And
But just
how long is that walking tour?
It takes about 2 hours to do. I think it's 1.6 miles in total length, but we stop and talk about the different buildings and what happened. But it's a great tour because there's so many buildings on that tour that were rebuilt following the earthquake.
Right.
Yeah.
So that the Sunday tour? Is there a different?
That's the Sunday tour, yes, and that's the tour that we're. You can take the tour every Sunday starting at 10 o'clock at the public library at the Michael Tobes Plaza now of the public library is our starting spot. And then the week of June 23rd to the 27th, so Monday through Friday, the week just before the anniversary, we're going to be doing that tour every evening at 6 p.m. So from 6 to 8 p.m., we'll be doing the quote, the typical Sunday walking tour Monday through Friday that night. Hoping that people will want to come out and really learn about the earthquake and learn what happened and the creation of the Spanish colonial revival style in Santa Barbara.
Yeah, that's great. And Betsy, in your research for your book, what was the most surprising or interesting takeaway? Like, what facts did you come across that you were surprised by the most?
I was so surprised at how well people responded. Some people, as I mentioned, put together bricks and created fireplaces and were able to cook and serve food for their neighbors and their families. I think in general, people responded very well. Um, I'm less concerned about the big one happening now, since considering how well people in Santa Barbara coped with an earthquake 100 years ago. We
Yeah.
have so many more resources now, and we even get like a 5 second warning. But that was one of my biggest surprises is people didn't go crazy. I mean, there was a little bit of screaming at first, but then it's like, okay, so what's the point of screaming? Let's get things going and start fixing things up. So
Do you know what the population would have been in
it
1925?
was it was a little over 20,000.
20,000. Yeah. Um, I guess that, obviously it's so impressive and it's so amazing that your group is doing all of this, that people have the opportunity to learn this history and know about the earthquake and how it shaped Santa Barbara. There obviously will be people who will be thinking, oh, it's an earthquake from the past, that's boring, that's not that interesting, right? Maybe both of you can just sort of chime in on, like, if you live in this town, right? Why is it so important that you know this history in terms of the 1925 earthquake in Santa Barbara? Why should they spend some time, researching, taking a tour, going to a lecture series? Why does it matter 100 years later?
Well, I think it makes Santa Barbara look like Santa Barbara. Before the earthquake, we were thinking about what should Santa Barbara look like, and after the earthquake, we began to have a consistent look. If you think, say, compared to Goleta or Ventura, not that they're slums or anything, but there's a difference between Santa Barbara and other cities around us. And by the way, I will be also speaking at the Architecture Foundation Thursday night, June 26th, about how people responded to the quake, and obviously I'll have more time to talk about that.
Yeah. Greg, what do you think?
Well, I just think it's sort of just in the work that I've been doing, sort of putting these programs together and then getting back into the walking tours. It's, Santa Barbara, I think, is also unique because the people participate. And I know you're talking about COVID and the transformation of State Street, and there's been a lot of participation. As far as drawing conclusions, maybe we're not so successful with that, but I think that people do have lots of opinions. And I think, as far as the walking tours, I think it's really nice because um, you know, prior to COVID, people would be driving up and down State Street and you'd be going to your place and then, turning off and going to the parking garage and all that. But to really get out and to walk on State Street, I think is um, really something that, many people don't really experience, and to take the time and sort of to look at the buildings. And I think it's, as far as appreciating what was, created post earthquake, I think is very important. We really do live in a very beautiful area, and we all want something, State Street to be more than it currently is right now, but it's still something that you can come out and enjoy. And it's just great to be able to get out of your car and walk a couple blocks and see new things, because we have locals that take the tour, we have tourists that take the tour, and we have lots of locals that bring family and friends that are visiting from out of town to take the tour. And they all really do, enjoy it, because you're getting out and you're seeing the city in a different way. And, I think that there's just, I think the appreciation from back for the city back since 1925 up until present, I think is still strong. And it's just an opportunity to come out and enjoy your city and to learn a little bit more.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had people on the tours who said to me, "Gosh, I've lived here for 30 years and I never noticed that."
Right, right. That happens quite often
Yeah.
because there's little gems tucked in here and there. There's buildings that aren't in the Spanish colonial revival style on State Street that you'll see, but they kind of blend in, with the other buildings, and make the streetscape what it is. So I think it's just really really fun to see to do the walking tours. they're a lot of fun.
Obviously, 1925, it's pre-internet, right? And so communication doesn't spread like it does today. But how significant of a quake was this regionally throughout the country? Did the federal government get involved, or what kind of attention or resources were paid to Santa Barbara after this happened?
Well, the news got around all over the world. Obviously, that's the sort of thing that happens today, and certainly photos of the worst hit buildings were all over the world. I found them even in newspapers in New Zealand. We didn't get a lot of help, and we didn't ask for much help from the federal government. We were sort of self-sufficient. We did get some help immediately from Los Angeles. The mayor of Santa Barbara, once the phone lines or the telegraph was working again, were able to say to Los Angeles, could you please send us some milk, some bread, and some cooked food? And they did that. But we were pretty self-sufficient. A telegraph was put together, and message was sent out and a ship at sea got it and then sent the news to San Diego. So the government automatically sent a whole bunch of Marines up here.
Hmm.
And they camped at Peabody Stadium and they walked around, and you can see, photos of them walking around. But there wasn't really much to do. People were fairly well behaved. And after a couple of weeks, they went back home. So there was a lot of interest in Santa Barbara. But we really didn't need all that much from outside organizations.
You know, and we tend to think, depending on what generation you're from, that the way things are, they just magically appeared that way. And I think what's most interesting about what happened after the 1925 quake and all the work that you do, in your professional and personal lives is reminding people that Santa Barbara's architectural style is very deliberate. It's very intentional. It comes from a lot of different people who have worked to create a landscape, a facade, an architecture that is different and is meaningful, and it doesn't happen by accident. And it
Mhm.
sometimes comes with community fights and political fights, but people
Right.
like you have to stand up for what makes Santa Barbara special and unique. And of course, all communities have to change and grow, and Santa Barbara has done that. But I think what's really cool about what you're doing is it kind of stops people and pauses them and reminds them, hey, here's how we got here. And it is a result of a whole lot of people working to keep it this way and to make it this way. And it's totally relevant because right now Santa Barbara is going through almost another, rebuilding era, right? In terms of the housing conversations and revival of State Street and retail and all of that. So it's all important lessons to learn. Before we wrap up, Greg, just going to give you sort of the last word on the workshops and the lectures. Where can people find out all this information in addition to what we've shared? Is there a website? How can people know everything?
Okay, yeah. So there's two different websites that you can go to. Our organization, the Architectural Foundation of Santa Barbara, has a very simple web address. It's just afsb.org. You can go on there to read about the lectures and the tours. There's also a website that was created for the commemoration of the 1925 earthquake called eq25.org. And if you click on the events tab on that website, you can actually scroll down and there's links to all of our activities on there. And I do want to say, in addition to Sherry Ray and Betsy's Green's lectures, which are going to be on the first and second Thursdays of the month, and Betsy's is going to be on the fourth Thursday. On the third Thursday, we are also doing a lecture by two local structural engineers, Sage Shingle and Jasper Jacobs. And we're going to be doing a lecture on why or how the buildings fell, why the buildings fell during the 1925 earthquake. And it's going to be, they're going to be speaking in layman's terms about what happened to buildings. And we've got probably, I think, over 100 photos that we've collected that Sage and Jasper are going to use to demonstrate different things. And the intent is not to scare people. It's sort of just, looking back at history, back in 1925, what happened, why things fell, and with the understanding that all of our buildings in Santa Barbara are much safer than they were back in 1925. There's been, I've mentioned the Granada Theater was seismically upgraded since it's been built, and a lot of the buildings along State Street, the city had a program during the 1990s where they went block by block, starting at the beach and working their way up State Street. And all of the existing unreinforced masonry buildings back in that time were all seismically upgraded. So no intent to scare anybody. But it'll be an interesting look by two local engineers as to, why buildings fell. Why was it the buildings on State Street and yeah, so I think that those four lectures are really going to be very interesting. And so you can go to afsb.org or eq25.org, and they're available there. And then we have the Sunday tours that are ongoing. And we're actually on the anniversary of the earthquake. June 29th is actually going to fall on a Sunday this year. It was a Monday back in 1925, but we're going to be doing our Sunday tour on the actual anniversary of the earthquake. And then in the evenings that week before, that Monday through Friday at 6 p.m., and we meet at the public library. And the both the tours and the lectures are $20 each, which I think is pretty reasonable for 2 hours of getting out and walking around or hearing experts like Betsy or Sherry Ray or our structural engineers, Sage and Jasper. So, yeah, we're really looking forward to it. It's going to be a busy month for the Architectural Foundation of Santa Barbara, but everything's coming together. Yeah, we're very proud
Well,
of the work that we've done.
it's going to be a once in a lifetime opportunity, right?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I saw there was a table at Earth Day, and there's a big
Mhm.
poster board of everything, and it looks so cool. Betsy, last word. Where can people want to read your book? Where can they find you and your book? And
My book is available at Chaucer's and the Historical Museum, and of course, Amazon.com. But I encourage people to shop locally. So,
Yeah.
okay.
And then Betsy will have her book available for sale also uh,
mhm.
after her lecture, which is going to be on Thursday, June 26th.
Well, Greg Rech, Betsy J. Green, thank you so much for taking a few minutes to talk about the magnitude, no pun intended, of the 1925 earthquake and what it means, what it meant, and how people were able to make Santa Barbara what it is based off of this big event. So, thank you so
Mhm.
much for your time,
Okay.
and
Thank
have a great
you.
day. Take
Yeah.
care.
Thank you, Josh.
Okay.
It's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. Great.
Mhm.
Talk soon.
All right.